In this unit, we're going to focus on a set of skills that in essence are the most valuable skills that a negotiator needs to pack into his or her toolbox and take with them to any negotiation. And I'm talking, of course, about communication skills. Communication is at the core of any negotiation process. When we can get something we need or want on our own, when we can go and take it off a shelf, then we don't need to interact with others, and as a result, we don't need to negotiate with them, we don't need to communicate with them. However, when we do need something from somebody else, and we need to engage with them in a negotiation process in order to get it, the primary mode of interaction that occurs between us is a communication interaction. So understanding how interpersonal communication works and what are the various tools that you can use in order to make a conversation constructive or unconstructive is perhaps the most valuable set of skills that a negotiator can have. Sounds simple, right? Well, as a colleague of mine, Bernie Mayer at the Werner Institute, often writes, humans are imperfect communicators. And boy, that's just how it is. He sure has got that right. And you know, he's no better than anyone else, and neither am I. Let's take a look, for example, at a scene that happened when I went up to him today to complain about some noise that he and his family are making, which is driving me crazy. I went up to him last night, I tried to talk to him, he slammed the door on me. I went up today to try and work it out with him again. This time, we actually sat down and had somewhat of a conversation, but man, that wasn't easy. And remember, humans are imperfect communicators. Well, I mean, thanks for letting me in this time. Not like last night when you slammed the freaking door in my face. Listen,
you came up here so rudely last night.
Forget last night. Listen. We have got to talk. Your dog is barking and is driving me freaking crazy. And you have got to, I don't know, shut it up, and muzzle it.
Your theater sound system that we're hearing all these noises later night that are setting my dog off. They're making it hard for my kids.
Setting your dog
making it hard for my kids to sleep.
Don't get me started on your kids.
And then when every time they go downstairs, they have to pass by the garbage you put in the hall. I don't know what kind of place you think this is. You leave your garbage sitting right there in the hall, and my kids go right through it.
That you are going to make up all this stuff just in order to avoid someone coming upstairs talking to you about a problem that needs fixing. That is your dog. The dog needs to be shut up.
Fixed.
The dog needs to be shut up. Okay, keep the dog quiet. It's driving me crazy. Okay.
All right, so you come in. Have you told me that now? Have you said what you needed to say?
Yes, I have.
And are you going to say you're going to fix your television set? Are you going to fix your entertainment system? Are you going to fix the garbage in the hall?
Are you going to fix your kids? Are you going to fix your dog? Is this?
What are you talking about?
Are you going to fix
now? So now you're telling me you want me to do something to my kids?
Forget it. You know what? Forget it. I don't want to talk about this anymore.
That works for me.
How can we get much better as communicators in a negotiation setting? So as with everything that we're learning in this course, there are basically two parts to that. The first is to understand on a fundamental level what is going on, how does this work, what does this interaction look like. And the second part of it is to learn specific tools that will help us to cope within this what is going on and have more control over what is going on. Let's start with the first part. On a very fundamental level, what is going on? What happens in communication? In order to start to help clarify it, let's talk about a communication loop between a sender and a receiver, a transmitter and a receiver, all sorts of terms from communications theory that we'll use somewhat interchangeably. So, if it were all just as simple as this, as message sent, message received, then we wouldn't need to be having this unit. Everything would be fine. You would say something, it would be understood in exactly the same way on the other side, and everything would be perfectly clear. However, we all know from our own experiences that we have those situations where we had one thing in mind and we tried to convey it to the other and we were hoping that they would wind up with with the same thing in mind. However, what happened in reality is that we had one thing in mind and tried to convey it to the other, and they wound up with quite a different thing in mind. And that's where we have these conversations where we think they're about apples, the other thinks that they're about oranges. So what we have, in essence, in a communication process are two people who are trying to communicate, but they're facing challenges. And those challenges, I mean, it really seems like there's this gap between communicators, between transmitters and receivers. And we have different tools that we use in this transmission and reception process, but they're not always enough, because sometimes that gap is really pretty big. So, one of the things that we're going to need to understand is what exactly is that gap, and why might our usual tools not be sufficient to always overcome it, or to ensure that we're always able to overcome it, and how might we repack our toolbox in a way that is cognizant that there is that gap, and that we need to bridge that gap somehow, and that and perform better in closing that communication loop on all sides, and making sure that what we try to transmit is what is indeed being received on the other side. So, in order to do that, we need to understand on a basic level that negotiation is a process in which it involves a sender, it involves a receiver, but we also need to take into account the channel between the sender and the receiver. Okay? So messages are traveling across that channel. In a spoken conversation, face to face, the channel seems to be the words that are spoken. I'm saying something and you on the other side are hearing it. But we know that that's not all, that there are other elements, that there are my facial expressions, my body language, my tone of voice, and we will discuss all that later on. But for now, let's just talk about this channel between you and us, you and me, that is connecting, and the messages flowing between the sender-transmitter and the hearer-receiver on the other side travels through a certain channel. To make this just a little more complex, we'll add on that there are two channels that are open at the same time. Because at the very same time that I am sending information through the channel to the receiver is also sending back a message through another channel. And that channel, which we call the feedback channel, is a channel that conveys, well, two things. One is that it conveys whatever messages that the other party has that they want to send back to us. But let's set their opinion and message aside. Even when I'm speaking as a sender, the transmitter is also sending back, through that feedback channel, is also sending back a message of, I'm listening, I'm with you, I hear you, I get what you're saying. Or conversely, what? I don't get it, what are you talking about? I can't hear you. And all of these subtle messages that have to do, not so much with the content of what I'm saying, but more with the process of communication. Is the other party hearing me? Is the other party understanding? Am I being clear? Does the other party want to hear more? Would the other party just like me to shut up and start listening to them? And all of that kind of subtextual, unspoken, but sometimes very obvious communication is happening through this other part, which we call the feedback channel or the feedback loop. Now, let's make this even a bit more complex. So, we now understand that there is a sender and a receiver. Communication happens through this channel. Okay? As communication is happening through this channel, another couple of processes are happening. The first is that the way I choose to convey my message involves what we call encoding on my part. I choose whatever words and tone of voice and facial expressions and length of speech, or whatever it is that I want to use in order to convey whatever idea it is that I'm trying to convey, which might be, I will give you $5,000 for the car, or tell your kids to stop making so much noise in the hall, and so on. The words that I spoke, I have this picture in my mind of what I want to see happening, and I encode it into a message that I convey through the channel to the other side. Okay, so that's the transmitter's encoding. Of course, on the receiver side, a process of decoding needs to happen. When the other party hears my words, hears my tone of voice, sees my body language, they decode that and understand through the prism of their decoding, understand whatever message it is that they understand. Now, in a perfect world, remember that first picture we saw, message sent, message received. But I think obviously both from our own experience and from the way we've shown this more complex communication loop, obviously if I have an idea in mind and I encode it and I send it through some channel which we know straight out is not going to be a perfect channel. You might not hear every word I said, you might not understand every word I said, you might not understand every word I said in the way I meant to say it. I may not have chosen the perfect words in order to convey my idea. So somewhere in that encoding and decoding process, things might get lost, and things do get lost. And a lot of the conflict-related feelings that we sense throughout negotiation processes often have to do with the fact that, once again, that humans are imperfect communicators because we never have this perfect meeting of the message sent, message received, as if we're sending electrical transmissions from my mind to yours, and the picture that I see in my mind, you then see in your mind. Okay? Now, to make this even more complex and to show a full picture of what is going on through the communications process, let's show one final, more comprehensive view of this communication loop. Okay? So in this way of looking at things, we have the transmitter, or here it's called a source. Okay, so we have the source of a message. The message is encoded through whatever language and tone and body language the source transmitter chooses to encode it through. It is shot through the channel, okay? And in that channel, it goes through what in communications theory is called simply noise. And that noise has to do with the way the channel affects things. So you're not hearing all my words, you're not watching all my body language, you're not, our realms of experience in understanding words and tones and emotional expressions and body language are simply not the same, so we're viewing things with very, very different sets of filters on either side of that communication channel, and the communication channel is distorting it. Okay? So there's kind of internal noise in the communication system, and once I have encoded and shot it down through the noise over to the other party or the receiver, the other party intakes it, receives it through a decoding process in which the message undergoes intake and understanding, and once again it is subject to that kind of subjective decoding that also easily causes misinterpretations, misconstructions, and just misunderstandings. So you never have this perfect outcome of what I intended is what you actually understand in the end. Finally, the receiver sends back, as the source is talking, the receiver is sending back, closing the feedback loop through positive or negative or vague messages of, yes, I understand you, I'm with you, I'm listening to you, keep on talking, or negative, don't tell me that stuff, I don't want to listen, I don't want it, and kind of rejecting, or just what, I don't understand, vagueness, or just nothing at all, being inscrutable. And that feedback loop is returning to the source and affecting the way the source continues to speak, including their decision to continue to speak or not to continue to speak, to share more information or not to share more information. Now, at the end of that loop, once the information has gone all the way across and that feedback, that micro-feedback has been received, at some point, we switch roles. The receiver says, okay, to themselves, okay, my turn to talk now. Sometimes, of course, they don't wait till the end and just jump in the middle. But even assuming that they have waited, they have heard, so one party has transmitted, encoded, channel, filters and noise, decoded, received on the other side, the receiver then turns into the transmitter, and the whole loop starts once again. I think that this explanation of how a communication loop works is an explanation unto itself of just how challenging it is to have a constructive conversation, and that's in the abstract. Now, throw in that we're trying to have a constructive conversation about something that might really be bothering us, or something that we really want the other party to do and they don't want to do, which is the essence of many negotiation communications. And I think that we can all see how communication is such a challenging thing to do in negotiation. What we're going to learn throughout the rest of this unit is how to use our communication tools in a very intentional and conscious manner in order to affect the conversation loop and do all we can to make it be a communication loop that works. That means that the messages that I transmit to the other are as close to my intention, are received on the other side, as close to my original intentions as possible. And conversely, to make sure that I understand the other party just as they want to be understood, because I need to know what they're telling me or I won't be able to figure out how to work with them. Now, just to add on one final challenge, is that we might be working with someone who has not taken this course, or has not taken any other course on how communication works and how on communication in negotiation processes is so crucial. So we might find ourselves in a situation where we need to be extra mindful and take some sort of responsibility for making the entire communication loop work. Whether we are the sender or the receiver, we are going to need to make this loop, this back and forth, work, and to do our best to enable that complete process, even though it might be intuitive to say, well, we'll do 50%, but they're going to need to do 50%. That's not enough. To be very skilled negotiation communicators, we're going to have to do some of that facilitation of communication work for the other party as well. Of course, don't get me wrong. I'm not talking about making concessions on the substance of the negotiation in any way. But I am saying that when we are mindful of how communication works in negotiation, we are going to do our best to be mindful of the entire process of what's going on our side and what's going on the other side, and do our best to make sure that whole system works well. The huge benefit in doing so for us is that the more we are mindful of the entire conversation, the entire communication pattern, the more likely it is that we will be able, at some point, to navigate and guide the communication process to lead towards a type of conversation that hopefully will lead towards a type of outcome that is beneficial to us. By taking responsibility for the entire feedback loop, we will be able to make sure that if the conversation seems to be going in a way that is not beneficial to us, we will be able, using communication tools, to regain control of the path that the communication is going and use it to shunt, guide, rechannel the communication back towards a place that is more beneficial to us from a negotiation perspective. So if we find ourselves talking about a topic that we really don't want to talk about, taking charge, managing the entire communication process will allow us to choose not to spend so much time on that topic, but rather spend more time on other topics. If the conversation is going in an unconstructive fighting path, and we think that we need to work together with the other party in order to reach a beneficial outcome, we will be able to use these communication tools to re-guide the communication process back onto a more constructive path, and thereby have a constructive negotiation that will hopefully lead us to a good outcome for ourselves. That is the purpose of this unit.